So everybody gets 60 seconds, up to 60 seconds for this first round, just to share what you noticed or what you saw. And I'll go second.
Are we just jumping in?
Yep.
Okay, well, I will jump in real quick then. What you see happen during the conversation between Dan and Herb is a lot of camera movement, and the camera seems to be floating around the two of them. And in fact, that was deliberate. Peter Deming and Lynch both wanted to. Deming himself actually says they wanted to convey a nervous feel to the story. And so they put the camera on what was called a floating jib. It's the camera attached to the end of a pole, and it allows them to sort of move the pole around a pivot, I think, and keep the camera in motion the entire time. And so that was deliberate. And Lynch said that it was part of the nightmare, was what he was trying to convey. And Mary Sweeney, who's the editor of Mullholland Drive, said that the very subtle floating of the camera gives you this unstable feeling that someone is watching these characters. And that really is ultimately the way Lynch repurposed the material from the original Mullholland Drive pilot, which I think my theory would be that it's supposed to now represent the dream of a character named Diane Selwyn, that you get the sense that there is a third presence observing this exchange, and that she is drawn to this place for perhaps a specific reason, but it's certainly a nervous, anxious feel that you get in the conversation.
Cool. I was looking at the performances, and I'm not sure if face acting is a thing, but these were pretty much mostly face shots. And is it Patrick? Is that the actor's name who plays Dan? Patrick
Fischler.
Yeah, tremendous. When they step outside, I would not be surprised if that was like not makeup to create that sweat on his face, because like throughout the scene, you just see the veins starting slowly to rise to the surface and bulge. His eyebrows, which are pretty distinctive, really did a lot of work. I don't know the other actor's name, but he was interesting too, because he kind of had like it seemed maybe just it was the suit talking or the body language, but he seemed to be more in a position of authority in terms of their relationship. And then as soon as he found out that he was also in these dreams, his whole demeanor changed, like really subtly. But I mean, the star of the show here is Fischler's face, even just from the nose to the forehead. But then he had these little smiles that would sort of nervous smiles that would sort of creep in and out. Really just amazing. Andrew?
The thing that sticks out to me, and it goes on what John was saying about how they shot it on that jib, is how, I mean, this is a movie where like the objective and the subjective almost collapse in on each other, right? It's like LA, but it's like a dream LA. And just a small moment I love is how it goes from being this floating over the shoulder shot and then pushes in to become a POV for Herb, essentially. Michael Cook's character looking at Patrick Fischler, and just the way that like this kind of objective over the shoulder shot becomes the subjective POV, even pans over to see the counter, is, I mean, just such a brilliant small touch for me.
Joel?
Yeah, as far as editing goes, I had a couple of little observations that really stuck out to me on this viewing. One of them was the decision to stay on his face at a certain point. I think it was like 3 or 4 shots in, where it seemed like you could cut away and his expression changes. It would almost be a natural point to cut away, but instead they hold on it and his whole expression shifts, and it gives you this uncanny effect. And I think, as you were saying, you know, Fischler's the star of the scene. It really pulls you into him. To me, that's almost the moment where the scene really starts to take off. And then just other than that, I was struck by the introduction of certain angles at certain points, like when he turns around and you see like behind him and it's a new angle. It felt like every time they did that, or when they inserted an insert, obviously, of the entrance sign on the restaurant and things like that, that they were almost opening up a new door. Like every step of the way, you can turn around here, you can go back, but they would make a decision that was leading you a little further down that corridor. It's
Yes.
that effect. And I think besides that, it would be the editing is mostly a matter of pacing in this scene because there aren't that many shots to choose from. So I liked the decision to hold on him as much as they do in spots where it feels like there were other options.
Yeah. Colin?
And yeah, as for me, before I get into the soundtrack, I think there's something very important in this scene is that Dan, as he has said as he talks about the dream, I think at some point he says in both dreams, and that is like if there's any time that I change my theory, whether it's big or small about Mulholland Drive, that is like the central crux for it. And I bring this up because when we go to outside of the diner, you just feel that slow dread building up. It's not really music, but it's more of this like ambient sound. And the thing is that the reason why I bring this up is that every time I watch it, no matter how many times, there's always that part of me that just like jumps like internally. Because most movies, when I watch like horror movies, like I watch it once and then I don't get scared after that. But there's a way that Lynch does this where it's like no matter how many times I watch Mulholland Drive, there's just something about the combination of the sound, the way everything slows down, that every time that jump happens, it just gets to me.
The the scene of the other guy at the counter, that shot happens again later, right? In the movie?
With Patrick Fischler standing there, and it's Naomi Watts who's seeing.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I should probably mention that Patrick Fischler, it feels like, for me at least, when we do revisit that scene, he has more of like an intensity than what we saw. Because, in this scene we watch, he's like scared to death. But there's something, I can't quite say what it is, but there's something about like just his eyes where it's like they're not blinking. There's just something like just wrong. Again, like I know that's not the focus of it, but again, come back to the whole in both dreams aspect. That's something I think about when it comes to that part about like, dream versus reality.
Well, we talked a little bit in the DMs before this about another scene that John was thinking about doing, which was like the party scene at the end. And I think you see the same thing in that second Patrick Fischler scene that you see in the party scene, which is her projecting her own emotional state onto everyone who is present, or each person who is present for that particular moment. It's kind of a brilliant, psychodramatic element of Mulholland Drive. So in that moment, the kind of fear of herself, because she's the monster behind the diner, that she's feeling in that moment is projected onto Patrick Fischler in that dream. So he's now embodying her fear, and she's him, and she's also the creature behind. It's just kind of brilliant, I think, the way that Lynch sort of makes the character not diffuse exactly, but like all of the like almost scatter to all of these different characters and kind of attach different parts onto them. It's like turning yourself into puzzle pieces or something that then have to be put back together, which I love. That's not elements, right? But
that's an interesting way to say it and to look at it. Who agrees with that, or who's drawn toward what Joel was just saying there?
I think that's a really good take, because when I do think of that creature, once again, I'm bringing back the whole in both dreams aspect. I think it is very important that one of the last sequences before we reach the final sequence is seeing that creature by the dumpster. And so I think of like, when she makes that deal with I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the guy's name, but it's basically it's a done deal for the assassination. And I just think of the proximity of Winkie's diner with that scene, and the fact that we see that creature at the beginning and the end, that there is I'm in the middle of a period where I'm trying to like, reinterpret Mulholland Drive for myself. So I apologize for not being as articulate, but I do think there's something to what Joel's saying.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And real quick, for John, what's the sound effect at the beginning of the scene?
Yeah, so it was obviously added to the scene. There's a smash cut from Rita/Camilla, who's just fallen asleep in Aunt Ruth's apartment. It's just smash cut to that Winkie sign, and there's a siren a loud siren going off. It's supposed to imply that there's a police car, an ambulance driving by the diner. But my interpretation of that is that it is Diane's sort of warning to herself that this is fraught territory, that she is about to dream what is essentially the worst moment of her life. She, as Colin was just saying, that later scene where Diane is actually in the diner contracting the hit on Camilla is the moment where she crosses the line. Joe says to her, once you hand that over, it's a done deal. And so she makes the commitment. And once she does that, my interpretation is that she's selling her soul at that moment, because it is at that moment that she looks up and she sees the man that will become Dan looking at her. And then there's a dissolve. I know we're talking about a different scene now, but there's a dissolve to the bum behind Winkie's holding the blue box. And my interpretation of that is that that's her soul. She's sold her soul to the devil. And so that scene resonates in her mind when she's dreaming. So that opening shot is there's a siren sound, and this is definitely an alarming sound. And then of course the scene plays out with Dan essentially as the surrogate Diane, and then he encounters that evil force behind the diner. That I think she's now dreaming what she imagined, if that makes any sense, when she herself was in the diner.
Yeah.
So
yeah, she's
the-
the creature we saw there.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I was just saying she's the person behind the diner that he's seeing in his nightmare. Because he's literally he literally was looking at her in real life, if we can use that terminology for Mullholland Drive.
Are those two guys there in the booth, or is that like somebody dreaming of two guys in a booth, which represents something else?
I interpret it all as her dream up until she wakes up. I mean, I know there's other readings of it. I know some people hate that reading, and
Honestly,
for me, that's the most resonant by far way to look at it. And even psychic imagining. It doesn't have to be she's asleep. It can be her dying vision, whatever. But I believe I see all of that as her perspective rationalizing or trying to digest what she's just done and all the things that have happened to her, and tell a story about it in like an indirect way.
I think that the dream interpretation is almost the only way you can look at it. And I don't mean to impose an interpretation, because with a Lynch film, that's a really dangerous thing to do. But Lynch is so overt about showing someone fall asleep at the beginning of the film. That person wakes up in the same bedroom at a certain point. That's Diane waking up. And in interviews, Lynch has actually said he couldn't come up with an ending, and then he came up with an ending that tied everything together and made the whole thing a lot simpler. And so I mean, yes, there's other ways to look at it, and I wouldn't discount them, but he sure seems to go out of his way to take the elements of the pilot and make them reflections of her real life. And that's what the fact of Mullholland Drive shows you. All the stimuli that resurfaces in her dreaming mind.
And just it also kind of explores just that basic concept he would do in Twin Peaks: The Return. The question of like, who is the dreamer, right? Like, I mean, this is, a similar idea. This is like her dream world. So it's both, it's kind of like real and not, at the same time.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I've had.
I'm sorry, John.
Oh, yeah.
I'm managing the time tonight.
Okay, all right.
Because I know your time is limited, so I'm going to let you close it out, but keep it succinct, please.
Oh, I'm closing it out?
Yeah.
Okay, real quick, then I will just say that Lynch had the pilot, and I've had an opportunity to see the pilot. Not the 88-minute version, but the one that he wanted to do. And from studying that and studying how he edited it for the film, what he added in terms of sound, and what he added in terms of some inserts, he's using those techniques, I think, to restructure it and imply that it is a dream.